There comes a time in every Hollywood legend's life when the truth can no longer be tucked away behind old studio walls. For James Garner, that moment arrived quietly, without any sensational headlines or dramatic press conferences. He wasn't a man who needed fanfare to make his words matter. His voice carried weight because it was honest, humble, and human. When he finally spoke openly about his early years, his journey, and his bond with fellow screen icon Randolph Scott, it wasn't just a story about fame. It was about two men shaped by their time, their struggles, and their principles. Garner had always been known as a man of few but meaningful words, and when he chose to share them, they resonated far beyond the sound stages of Hollywood. This was the truth he had carried for decades. James Scott "Bum" Garner, the name itself carried the simplicity of small-town America. Born on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma, he came into a world that was still reeling from the effects of the Great Depression. Life was far from glamorous, but it was real, honest, and tough. His childhood was steeped in the values of hard work and quiet endurance. He grew up surrounded by fields, dust, and a tight-knit community where neighbors leaned on each other to survive. His father, Weldon Bumgarner, worked hard to keep the family afloat, while his mother, Mildred, gave James the warmth that shaped his earliest memories. Tragically, that warmth was stolen from him far too soon when she passed away when James was just 5 years old. In a time when childhood should have been filled with play, his was marked by loss and resilience. Norman wasn't just his birthplace. It was where the foundation of his character was quietly forged. In that modest little town, amid poverty and struggle, a future Hollywood legend took his first breath. James's early years were anything but easy. After his mother's death, his father struggled to keep the family together. Like many families during the Depression, survival often meant moving from one place to another, living with relatives, and taking on whatever work came their way. For young James, this meant growing up faster than most kids his age. He worked odd jobs, learned to be independent, and built a quiet strength that would stay with him for life. The absence of a stable home might have broken some, but for James it carved out a rare kind of empathy. He understood hardship on a personal level. He never forgot what it felt like to be the kid standing on the outside looking in. That feeling would later make him a different kind of actor, one who carried emotion not in grand speeches, but in a glance, a pause, or a quiet smile. These early hardships didn't just shape his personality. They gave his performances a soul. Before Hollywood ever called his name, James answered a very different call, one to serve. At just 16 years old, restless and ready to carve out his own path, he left school and joined the Merchant Marine. It was a bold move for a teenager, but James was never one to back down from responsibility. A few years later, his sense of duty took him even further when he joined the U.S. Army during the Korean War. There, in the freezing cold and brutal landscapes of Korea, he displayed the same quiet courage that had carried him through childhood. James was wounded in combat, not once, but twice, earning him 2 Purple Hearts. The war left its mark on him, physically and emotionally, but it also gave him something else: discipline, perspective, and a deep understanding of what real heroism meant. This was why later in his acting career, he never liked to glorify war. He knew the difference between fiction and the front line. Those years of service didn't make him famous, but they made him the man Hollywood audiences would one day admire. James never set out to be an actor. In fact, he stumbled into it almost by accident. After returning from the war, he settled in Los Angeles, taking on different jobs just to make ends meet. He even did some modeling for print ads, a far cry from the battlefields he had just left behind. One day, while helping a friend with a role, a talent agent noticed him. There was something about his quiet confidence, his tall frame, and the way he carried himself without trying too hard. That chance encounter opened a door James hadn't even been knocking on. Soon he started taking small roles in television and film. He learned the craft not in acting schools but on the job, watching, listening, absorbing. His big break came in 1957 when he was cast as Brett Maverick in the TV series Maverick. The role suited him perfectly: charming, reluctant to fight, quick with a witty comeback. It wasn't just a character, it was a reflection of James himself. Overnight, the quiet boy from Oklahoma became a household name. With Maverick, James Garner wasn't just another TV star, he was a phenomenon. At a time when Western heroes were usually stoic, gun-slinging cowboys, Garner's Maverick broke the mold. He was clever, reluctant to fight, and always one step ahead with humor and wit. Audiences connected with him instantly. They saw not just a character, but a real person behind the hat and boots. After Maverick's success, James smoothly transitioned to the big screen. The early 1960s saw him shine in romantic comedies like The Thrill of It All and Move Over, darling alongside Doris Day. His natural charm made these films timeless classics. Then came one of his most iconic roles, the 1963 war epic The Great Escape. Where he starred alongside Steve McQueen, James's versatility stood out. He could make you laugh, move you to tears, or keep you on the edge of your seat. But what made his rise even more remarkable was that he never lost the humble, down-to-earth nature of his upbringing. Fame didn't change him. It simply made the world see who he already was. By the late 1960s, James Garner had firmly cemented himself as one of Hollywood's most bankable and beloved stars. Behind the scenes, James Garner was exactly what fans hoped he'd be: genuine. Colleagues often described him as a true gentleman, a man who treated everyone on set with the same respect whether they were a co-star or a crew member. He was punctual, professional, and refreshingly humble. In an industry known for ego and excess, Garner stood out because he didn't play the Hollywood game. He was simply himself. Unlike many stars of his era, James avoided unnecessary drama. He preferred honesty over image, kindness over power plays. When he had something to say, he said it directly, without bitterness or bravado. He often used humor as a shield, deflecting attention away from himself with a quick quip. But those who knew him well understood the depth behind that smile. When he finally spoke openly about his friendship and mutual respect with Randolph Scott, it wasn't with sensationalism, but with grace. He had admired Scott's quiet dignity as much as Scott had admired his own. Their bond was built not on Hollywood politics, but on shared values. It was a rare, unspoken understanding between two men of the same cloth. The 1970s brought James Garner yet another unforgettable role, this time as private investigator Jim Rockford in The Rockford Files. The show wasn't just a hit. It became a cultural touchstone. Rockford wasn't your typical tough guy detective. He used humor, intelligence, and cleverness to get out of tight spots. James's portrayal gave television a hero that felt real, flawed, and deeply likable. For this, he earned the Primetime Emmy Awards in 1977, a moment that solidified his status as a legend. Garner didn't stop there. His film career thrived with memorable performances in Murphy's Romance, 1985, which earned him an Academy Awards nomination for Best Actor. Decades later, in 2004, his role in The Notebook touched a whole new generation, proving that true talent never fades. Even in his later years, he carried that same gentle power in his performances. But beyond the awards and the applause, James was known for something rarer: consistency. He gave his best in everything he did. His name didn't just represent a star, it represented a standard of excellence. For all his fame, James Garner's greatest role might have been that of a devoted husband. He married Lois Josephine Fleischman Clark in 1956, just 16 days after they met at a party. It was a whirlwind romance that no one expected to last, but it did. Nearly 6 decades later, their love story remained one of Hollywood's quiet miracles. James often spoke of Lois with a mix of affection and humor, recalling how he spent just $77 on their honeymoon and how it about broke him. Lois, who practiced Judaism, brought her own culture and warmth into their home, and their bond transcended differences. Their marriage had challenges like any other, but it was grounded in loyalty, respect, and genuine love. He often described marriage like the army. Everyone complains, but you'd be surprised at the large number of people who re-enlist. That line wasn't cynicism. It was the honest humor of a man who understood commitment. James Garner left behind more than just iconic roles. He left behind a legacy of integrity. He redefined what it meant to be a leading man, strong but kind, confident but humble. His work in television and film spanned decades, inspiring countless actors who followed. He was a fierce advocate for actors' rights, often challenging unfair studio systems, not for fame, but for fairness. His on-screen characters were memorable, but it was his off-screen character that made him unforgettable. Even after his passing in 2014, fans continued to celebrate his life, not with scandalous headlines, but with warmth and respect. In an industry built on pretending, James Garner was always real. And that, more than any award, is the kind of legacy that lasts forever. When it comes to understanding measurements like 8 inches, it often helps to compare them to familiar everyday objects. 8 inches may not sound like much when spoken, but seeing it in real-world examples gives you a clear idea of its actual length. For example, a standard pencil is typically about 7.5 inches long, just slightly shorter than 8 inches. This means an 8-inch length is just a little longer than your average school pencil. Another useful comparison is with a standard dollar bill. A US dollar bill is about 6.14 inches long, so 8 inches is about 2 inches longer than that. This makes it easy to visualize if you've ever held a bill in your hand. Similarly, a regular dinner fork is usually around 7 to 8 inches long, meaning if you hold one in your hand, you're essentially holding something very close to 8 inches. A tablet device, like a small 8-inch model, also provides a good reference point. Many compact tablets have an 8-inch screen, giving a precise sense of that measurement. Even an average adult's hand, from the base of the palm to the tip of the middle finger, is around 7 to 8 inches, depending on the person. All these comparisons show that 8 inches is a fairly noticeable length. It's not extremely long, but not small either. It falls in a mid-range size that is easy to relate to everyday items. This makes it practical in many different settings, from home measurements to fashion and tech devices. The idea of whether 8 inches is big depends entirely on context. When we talk about general objects or items, 8 inches is considered a moderate to large size. For example, in terms of gadgets like tablets or tools, 8 inches is a very handy and popular size because it's large enough to be useful but still easy to handle. In personal measurements, 8 inches is often perceived as quite big. Many people associate this size with being above average, and that's true in a variety of measurement contexts. For example, if you're comparing objects like knives, scissors, or stationery, an 8-inch item is typically larger than the standard version. Culturally, people also use terms like big or small based on their own reference points. If someone is used to smaller measurements, 8 inches might seem large. On the other hand, if someone regularly handles larger objects, it might not seem quite as big. The psychological perception of size plays an important role. Numbers alone don't always create a full picture, but when you compare or visualize, it starts to make sense. Overall, in most everyday scenarios, 8 inches is on the larger end of the spectrum, making it a length that often stands out. This means that 8 inches is a little more than 20 centimeters, which is roughly the length of a standard A5 notebook's height. People who are more familiar with the metric system can visualize this length more easily. In some countries, inches are not commonly used, so these conversions are extremely helpful. Whether you're working on DIY projects, ordering items online, or measuring objects for fitting, knowing the metric conversion saves a lot of confusion. Also, in industries like fashion and construction, measurements are often provided in both inches and centimeters. That's why understanding this basic conversion is so practical. 8 inches isn't too big to be difficult to work with, and it's not so small that it's insignificant. It's a handy mid-range length. Sometimes you need to estimate length but don't have a measuring tape or ruler. Luckily, 8 inches can be visualized using common everyday items. One of the easiest ways is by using your hand. For many adults, the distance from the tip of the thumb to the tip of the pinky finger when the hand is stretched out, a hand span, is about 8 to 9 inches. That gives a close approximation without needing a tool. Another simple method is a standard sheet of printing paper. A regular A4 sheet is about 11.7 inches long. So if you imagine trimming a little less than 4 inches off, you'll get a sense of what 8 inches looks like. A kitchen fork, a smartphone, or even a pencil can also help. Lining up one or more of these items can give you a pretty accurate estimate. For example, stacking a dollar bill and adding about 2 inches is another practical trick. The goal of these visual tricks is to help you recognize 8 inches naturally. With a little practice, you'll be able to estimate this measurement confidently anywhere, whether at home, at work, or while shopping. 8 inches isn't just a random number. It's a length that's actually very practical in many areas of everyday life. For example, in the kitchen, many standard chef's knives are 8 inches long. This size is preferred because it's versatile, long enough to handle big cutting tasks, but not too long to make it hard to control. In technology, many tablets and portable screens are around 8 inches. This makes them large enough for comfortable viewing, but still easy to carry. It's a sweet spot between small smartphones and larger laptops. In clothing and accessories, 8 inches might refer to wristbands, fabric lengths, or small bag dimensions. Builders and DIY enthusiasts also often work with measurements in this range, especially for shelves, wood pieces, or tiles. Even in decorations, crafts, and fashion design, this length is used often because it's manageable and versatile. It's long enough to be noticeable, but short enough to fit easily in most spaces. In short, 8 inches is a common and useful measurement across many industries.